So today we're going to talk about basically secrets from these incredible leaders, Gail, Clark, and Phil. And unfortunately, I sent out a 12-page document to them last night to review in preparation. So let's see how well they did their homework. I actually want to break this conversation about acquisition strategies into a couple different segments. So, we're looking at how do you scale your organization from pre-revenue all the way to, IPO and $1 billion business. I thought we would start out by talking about, kind of where you started, which is, Gail, how do you look at the first part of acquiring customers, which is who is your ideal customer? At Constant Contact, how did you figure that out? And what are some ways in which you guys codified that persona?
Yes, so for those who may not know Constant Contact, very focused on the small business market. And by small, we really meant small. So 70% of our customers had less than 10 employees. And honestly, that target was, just started out as originally the vision for how we started the company. And that was who we were passionate about. And so we kept validating, because we had a venture board who kept wanting us to go up market, kind of sort of their playbook. It's really hard to build a business at $30 a month. If you can get $1,000 a month, it'll go faster. Yep, totally get that. But we just spent a lot of time talking to customers, understanding them. And so at the first level, it was our mission, and then it just became both our passion and our expertise to truly understand this target market. Obviously, small business sounds like one of the things I would always laugh at is, small business isn't actually one market.
Right.
It's a ton of micro verticals. And so we started by dropping down into 3 macro segments: B2B, B2C, nonprofit and associations. So about 25% of our business was also nonprofits and associations, small ones to match the small target. And then we dropped one level deeper into some key industries. So can I say when we were the crispest, we had 10 micro segments. We understood them well, and then a range of graphics, demographics, and firmographics that went with them.
So situational as well as the kind of broader opportunity.
What stage are they in? How old is the leader was a huge determinant of their tech savvy and comfort with tools. So it was really quite a mix.
Got it. And who was involved in that process?
So when we were small, everybody, but me, marketing, product, everybody.
Got it.
Yep.
So Phil, kind of looking back at the Marketo days, how did you solidify who the ideal customer was?
Well, we did 2 things, I think, that really kind of worked in great complementarity. 4 months in from kind of the day we opened the doors and even started any kind of operations, we had our first product in the market. So we kind of built a product, not with a lot of precision about who we were going after, but to start to actually be able to test. And it only cost us, $300,000 or something like that to have a product in market. That gave us a beachhead to then start content marketing. And my co-founder was pretty amazing, John Miller, who's now the CEO of Engagio, and paying it forward to the next round of companies. And he started just as prolifically writing and publishing and blogging and having ideas out there. Very conscious strategy, early days to think about big picture items, what got traction, and he would start to double down and pay attention to what was getting read and what was getting consumed and what was getting commented on. And it was helpful to have a co-founder that happened to be the head of marketing but also had a degree in physics from Harvard, so he could run the numbers and do the statistics and do all that kind of stuff. But he started to see insights about where we were having interest, what messages were resonating, and that ability to feed that into the product and to feed that back into the market, such that by the time we came to market, we had a really well-honed idea of who we were trying to sell to, and we had 15,000 names in the database of just those people that he had generated by winnowing down. And I think that idea of while a product is being built, having your message in market, and being able to understand, almost using the content marketing in that early day as a surrogate for product was a tremendous asset to just come out of the gates then with the real product like a rocket ship. It was just a amazing thing the way he put that together for us.
So product led in many cases. In that case.
In some sense, thought leadership led. So John's ability to write thought leadership, it wasn't talking about a product, it was talking about the problem we wanted to solve, and to see what resonated and who read it and who passed it on and who shared it gave us an idea of who that ideal persona was. and with that ideal persona and the idea of what feature, and then as we got closer, he started to talk about features and not just ideas. And then he would come and say, hey, these features are getting interesting. People really, really care about Google AdWords, but they're not so interested in email marketing or whatever was at that day. And those kinds of things gave us tremendous insights into how to go forward.
Got it. Clark, what about you?
So our focus has, from the beginning, and it probably still is, on design, the designer, the designer's problems, and then kind of like bridging this gap between the designer's identity in work and out of work. So I think there's a certain amount of distance, I think, for many of the folks who are primary cohorts for many of these, especially SaaS, especially enterprise businesses, between who they are at work and who they are at home. There's some distance. You won't probably get from many accountants, if you ask them what they do, they'll say they're accountants. If you ask them what they're all about, they probably won't say that they're accountants. Right? So we have kind of an unfair advantage, kind of in two dimensions, in that designers are perhaps more designery outside of work than they even are inside of work. So it gave us a great ability to kind of catalyze their personal identity and create, kind of generate energy to get them excited about the product, especially, when you add in like this democratization of IT, of people just making decisions for themselves and their teams all the time. So kind of tapping into the culture was probably the place that our entry point, and we've tried to preserve that core since then, like making things, whether they're marketing vehicles, like the cookies, kittens, and crack of marketing, like the blog posts and the webinars and all these things that people are willing to be reciprocal with. Building those things, making sure that they are, that the authenticity of those things and the way that we're kind of being a part of the conversation of the design culture stays in tune as we kind of scale the operation.
I mean, it's interesting. I hear a lot of kind of aspirations around who that ideal customer was. Like, you had passion; it was part of your mission, right? Your founder built a product and a message for this audience. I go to the Invision site, and there's like career advice for designers. But you're an investor now, Phil, and you're looking at companies that come in with kind of a SOM or kind of a market-driven. Here's how big the market is in this category for this customer, and hence we're going to go after it. What kind of guidance do you have on the more kind of bigger picture approach to identifying an ideal customer? And if so, what metrics would you be looking for that company to be able to bring to the table that was the right customer? Would it be ARPU or cost of acquisition? So how would you think about them going after a more market-driven approach versus a mission-driven approach? And then what metrics would you want to see as an investor in that was the right cohort or the right group?
Well, you have to, I think if you're not creating a company with some kind of a mission-driven approach where you actually, number one, have real knowledge of the market you're going after. You don't just spot a market by looking at numbers and reading numbers. You spot a market by believing in it and knowing it and feeling it in your bones and believing in it. And I think all three of us had very much that. And by living that market and understanding it, and so I look for entrepreneurs that know their market, and strangely, I've seen some serial entrepreneurs that can just go do anything, and it's quite amazing. But I think in general, you have to know your market. But then ultimately, I think if you're a young company and you're able to be nimble and able to be focused in what you're going after, you're going to either start to see the stuff fly off the shelves just a little bit. In a small way, in the targeted places you go, or it's not. So that's really, I guess, CAC is sort of the surrogate for that. Can you get sales reps on board, and can you get a new rep on board and able to sell and get productive fast? Can you add a second one? Can they get productive fast? And so a little bit in the micro, it's, are you able to replicate that sort of early success of the close founders with other people and transfer that to somebody else? And so I think that has that as I said, that's the sort of the surrogate is CAC. But I don't think you need a lot of numbers, frankly. I think you can kind of know, in some sense, at the beginning, are people resonating with what you're doing? Do they like what you're saying? Are they buying it? Is it hard or is it easy? Is it pushing a rope or is it chasing people that want to pull? And to me, that sense of is there enough demand such that you're going, oh my gosh, what do we do next? Is sort of the best surrogate in some sense for do you have that kind of product market fit?
You seem like you're having a reaction here, Gail, to that.
Yeah, I actually think sometimes people focus on CAC way too early, because when you're at small scale, you're still trying to figure out exactly what your go-to-market is and exactly which channels, and you're buying under scale in every medium you're buying in, if you're buying anything. So I think it's more about customer engagement and customer success. So you've hit something when customers use again, and get huge value. So we were always about quick to wow, quick to value. And the more I was thinking about ideal customer, one of our key criteria was, will this customer see measurable, unambiguous value creation?
Yeah.
Right? Because if they will, they're going to get excited, they're going to convert, they're going to pay, they're going to stay, and they're going to tell their friends. And if your value creation is subtle, you're screwed. Just my general point of view. Do you agree with that? Yeah.
If your value creation is subtle, you were
Yeah, you should be able to hit your customers over the head with the value creation. Whether
Right on.
you're saving them time, saving them money, making them money. I love driving the top line, not the bottom line. Making their lives easier. It shouldn't be subtle.
Right on.
Yep.
Right on.
Yep.
Well, let's kind of transition a little bit, right? So, the goal of people listening is how do you build a $1 billion company at scale, right? How do you get to $100 million in revenue? What channels make the most sense? What lessons learned? So as you and I talked a couple days ago, because I've been stalking you for a couple weeks here, you talked a lot about those early channels that you invested in. So what were those early marketing channels for Constant Contact, and when did they stop working?
Yep. So, we started with channel partners, and the guy from McKinsey was saying those are kind of iffy. I would totally agree with him. I think we spent the first 2 years, every board meeting, it's like, oh, we just signed this big channel partner, it's going to change everything. The next board meeting was, well, they don't really know how to sell through other people's products, or we didn't have alignment on the marketing plan. And so I must have hoped and dashed the hopes for a while. And then finally we said, we got to just take control of our own destiny, and started using the most obvious pay-per-click kind of keywords. And then we went through a period of trying new channels where we always had, we called it test, scale, tune, test, scale, tune. So we always had what we were scaling now and what we were testing in hopes for the future. And what was really interesting is nothing ever stopped working, which was your question.
Yeah.
But things that didn't work early started to work late. And we generally found things either worked or didn't work, and it was very black and
Give
white.
an example of one that didn't work early but worked late.
Banner advertising. So we were way early on the category. So, and there was no brand recognition. So banners were just horrible. But 5 years later, after we'd done a bunch of category work, the brand had grown, banner advertising worked.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, you have tremendous word of mouth at Invision, right?
That's all we have.
That's right.
So
That's
we
your
we
channel.
have almost any Envision users in the room. Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, of course. There you go.
I do
Do
that.
we get a discount if we're not?
No discounts. No discounts. No, so
Nice.
we have no paid acquisition. Almost no paid acquisition. We have them experimentally. We run experiments to see, if this kind of play can work, and then we look for ways to then try to move those organic. But even for enterprise business, which is now more than half of our business, the $1 million account comes from the $10 dude, right? And there's just a cascading funnel all the way up. So, to answer your question, so we have no outbound sales and we have no paid acquisition. So I'm probably the wrong person to answer this question.
No, I think you're the right person, right? Because if you look at Neeraj's side, the last slide was all about product.
Sure. So it is product. Probably our number one. We have two channels that I think we rely on the most. Our customers, telling a lot of brand association stories, a lot of talking about our customer. Probably the most effective thing that we did super early on was this thing called Inside Design, that many of you have gotten too many emails from me about. Inside Design at LinkedIn, Inside Design at Airbnb. We just profiled our customers and then used the celebrity of our customer's brand and of the designers in that department as kind of a catalyst for exposure, right? And our brand story has always been, the best companies in the world that create the products that you love the most, create those products with Invision. That has always been the unspoken, unarticulated story, that we have in mind whenever we build anything. So giving our customers a platform to tell their transformational story, like how do we transform as a designer, as a design team, or go from little d to big D as a design organization. Telling that story and then kind of like just taking credit for it, right? Subliminally, right behind the scenes. That's our kind of channel number one. And if there's like a offshoot of that channel, it's agencies. So we have, many of you have like these super virally coefficient, user bases, right? Agencies for us are that, right? There's an incredible amount of churn inside of agencies, and people are going into companies and out of companies, so there's that dimension. And then there are, obviously they're doing work for clients, for many of you in this room. So propagating that channel and making sure that it's really easy and sometimes cheap if not free for certain categories of agencies to be able to use the product. So we're having the product and our customers tell the story for us, which then, by the way, just long-term, roll the clock forward 6 years. When we do want to do something with paid acquisition, it builds the space and brand recognition, whatever, to be able to tell a story into a channel.
And that content's out there.
Content's there.
That's right.
And if I could just add, I just think at this point in time, this story is like the whole panel, in some sense. This notion today of getting bottoms up to your customers and delighting them and getting them to spread word of mouth to each other and to have the product and the people tell each other. What you look at Clark's company, you look at Atlassian, they're now public, you look at Twilio, now public, you look at Auth0 growing like a weed, or other companies. They're all doing this bottoms up approach where it's people to people in a world where everybody's on Facebook, where everybody's tweeting, where everybody's talking to each other within their category. This is the new, this is the new generation of the thing that's now old that I did. And I just want to highlight.
I'm just copying you.
No, I just think you've invented the new thing, or you're part of it, and it's a new mode that's everybody.
There's a name for it. It's called influencer marketing.
It's all influencer marketing.
I think this is the logical conclusion to the democratization of IT.
Yeah.
It's like the democratization of all the things, right? Like, so the question is how much time out of the day is your potential customer on the clock thinking about the potential of doing something different at work, right? Like we're all as consumers, like inside of our work and outside of our work, super sensitive to anything that isn't functional, usable, and beautiful. So we are anxious to replace anything in our lives that doesn't meet that standard in work and out of work.
Totally.
So like if I'm at home and someone says, hey, you should use this thing, like we're using this, or this is much better, and the cost to try is nil, right? The cost to switch is like 1/4 of an inch to the left or right on this eternal ballot box called the screen, right? I'll just use this app from now on, right? And it's not that people make this super conscious, rational, buyer profile, motion decision. They just kind of try something and they kind of just forget the other one existed, right? They just kind of never go back to the thing they were doing. And so we try to optimize the funnel and our story and the product, obviously, to make, people use the word frictionless. We kind of like think about how do you get somebody, this dynamic, romantic, relationship between the user, just getting them to try you, and eventually they didn't even realize they bought. And sometimes it's not them who buy, right? So it's a whole big thing. But the quantity, the quotient that determines someone's buyer influence is kind of individual passion and organizational influence.
No, I love it.
Right?
I love it.
Not necessarily control over whatever checkbook writes the check, right? So you can have like so-and-so, and she's just a rank and file individual contributor in the design department or the marketing department, right? And she just wants to use this product, and she loves to tell people about things that she loves. And she's hard on the Slack messages, right? So she's just dropping this thing in, and no one else really feels that strongly, right? And when they're offered something and it's marginally better and the cost of switching is low, then
they'll do
right?
it. They'll do it.
And then we've scaled all the way to enterprise based
It's interesting. In a past life, I was a Marketo customer, and I found that whenever my VP marketing would go, we would be using another company's product. We won't say who they are, but they would go to the Marketo conference and they would say, "I'm just going to get information," and they'd come back and say, "We're going to switch to Marketo." And I found that the conferences were really effective. So I imagine that was a massive channel for you guys. Talk about the other channels as you were getting to scale. Obviously pay-per-click was one. I know you had a massive enterprise channel. Talk about what strategies you used and what the leverage you used to acquire customers as you were going through the scale process at Marketo.
Well, the strategy we used was, number one, trying to be we had every company doesn't have this benefit to be able to be the user of your own product. So we were the best users of our own product, and so we used the content-driven marketing strategies tremendously we ranked first in search optimization on every last term that had anything to do in our marketplace because we were able to write better stuff that was able to get search optimized really well. And then we put behind that just a highly cooperative sales and marketing organization where the sales team understood that they were collaborators with marketing and that they would use marketing, and they would invite people to conferences, and they would send people to thought leadership. And so we got a resonance between sales and marketing going on, and building a sales team that was able to leverage that kind of influencer marketing and leverage that content marketing rather than sort of the more historic kind of sales models of the heroic salespeople riding off to go do battle and come back with the deal, was the primary thing that we tried to do. The key strategy that was so critical in Marketo was starting to shift into trying to sell to the world's largest enterprises and realizing that those were much longer sales cycles, that if we're going to take a $5 million deal out of Microsoft or a $6 million deal out of Google or $10 million deal out of GE or whatever, that was going to take time and energy. And so the thing that was most challenging was that sort of shift in the culture from this very fast, high transaction volume to more patience and realizing that ultimately we had built a product that was going to have to get sold in a different way with a different kind of sales organization and everything else. So in some sense, I don't know what the lesson from that is that's necessarily replicatable, but understand that as different markets appear, you do have to adopt different strategies, and then understanding how do they coexist and how do you balance investment among them and those kind of things become the next strategy for scale up, as you realize that you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again, but you need to start to really differentiate and build what I would call a portfolio approach to getting to market.
Right, and Gail, when we talked, you talked a lot about that as well, right? So growing the conversion funnel. Talk about that process a little bit.
Sure. So, maybe I'll, so first of all, how many people are small dollar, high volume in the room? Oh, not very many. Okay. So, when you're small dollar, high volume, it is all about the funnel and kind of you're feeding the top of the funnel, but how do you drive conversion and retention in the funnel? And so we were funnel fanatics. So if you meet anyone from Constant Contact, they'll tell you what part of the funnel they were part of and responsible for and what the math was. So as we started to grow the top of the funnel, that became about really understanding the customer journey and how to get, it's very hard to put this in perspective now, but at the beginning, our number one competition was just people not knowing what email marketing was. So we had to reach and teach. And so our number one competition was no use at all. And so we had to figure out how to get to folks, right? Because if you're not thinking about doing email marketing, you're not Googling the term. And so we gradually, quite surprisingly to our venture backers, started to go offline, which is just like crazy for a software company. But we did it very methodically, and we did it with very good metrics and measurability, which I can talk about. So we started kind of driving the top of the funnel, but the biggest thing we did was funnel optimization. We did that with a heavily cross-functional engagement process internally, and just a real lot of understanding that it really was all about the onboarding flow. If customers don't get, software as a service, if they don't use, they don't pay.
Right.
If they don't use, they don't stay. So it really ended up being a lot about how do we get them to first use and then repeat use in a way that feels very empowering and very positive. So turns out they had tons of insecurities about their design skills, about their writing. Turns out to send an email, you got to do a little bit of design, a little bit of writing. So how do we help them really feel great and confident and have a first use that then drives really good response?
Right.
And then they're like, wow, this is great. And then they pull their credit card out. But until they have that experience, they weren't going to because they were unfamiliar with the category. So for us, conversion optimization was really about first use and first success optimization.
Got it. So at its height, what were you putting into Google AdWords at Constant Contact? Can you share that data with us?
I think I can, but it wasn't our biggest spend category in the end. It was just, you asked where we started. That's where we started. So I think our peak was $1.5 million a month-ish.
And what were the other channels that would give?
Yeah, so we started doing mass media. So we went from, this isn't going to be the right order, but we started in radio. So we tested radio regionally and then went nationally. We tested TV regionally and then went nationally. So our biggest spend was clearly TV.
Got it. Interesting. So the hacks that you were finding were really in how to get that funnel to be more efficient at the bottom.
Yep. Well, the reach to market. We also did regional seminars. So we actually partnered with chambers of commerce and small business development centers to do 2.5-hour in-person, how to grow your business with email marketing seminars. So it actually ended up that kind of in-person touch was pretty important to get to that super local market.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, what I've heard you all say, is really about content. I mean, content connecting with influencers, getting customers to act as champions, automating and optimizing that. So we've got about 5 minutes, and what I'd love to do, and I think this is kind of the spiritual part of this conversation here, is if you were to look back, Gail, Clark, and Phil, and talk to yourselves 10 years ago. I know we just talked about age, and you were like, I was 14
I was just a
10
punk
years ago.
10 years ago.
But do that exercise, and you look at how you scaled your organizations. What was the main learning, and what would you do differently in how you scaled your company in terms of acquiring and retaining customers?
Well, I'll start, I guess. The lesson, or what I would do differently, is Marketo. We became an acquisition machine. I mean, it was just incredible how we could put money in the top and get revenue out of the bottom over and over and over again. But it's monochrome. It's monoculture in the sense that it didn't let us grow and understand enough about growing customers, enough about how do you sell a second product into customers, about how do you start to have customer success and renewals that were as strong as they could be. And so I think, kind of what I would tell my younger self if I could do it over was to really think systematically about, if you're having customer acquisition success and you're growing fast, how to not just keep doubling down on that, but to keep peeling off part of your attention, part of your time, part of everything into how do you grow, how do you renew, how do you bring that second product to market, how do you have more things to sell over time, and to not just get addicted to putting more money in the top, because ultimately that's going to stop paying off, and then it gets hard if you haven't played the clock right.
I love that. What about you, Clark? The 14-year-old version of you.
He didn't do anything right. No, so just early in the business, I probably would have moved to enterprise a little sooner, I think, just because why not? Probably also so an exercise that we do now in the company, how we think about marketing as just vehicles, right? Vehicles of engagement. So you want to create authentic engagement with people, you want to do authenticity at scale. These two ideas are seemingly contradictory, right? And for good reason, because it's really, really hard. So we think about our marketing vehicles as like a grab bag of things that we can throw at any time, right? Let's do a UI kit, let's do an ebook, let's do a webinar, right? Now we've applied a certain level of kind of organizational rigor in marketing, and we've created the slogan phrase, the Ec2 Framework, which is, energy.
Sounds official.
Yes, totally. By the way, it's just a word I made up. It's just a word I made up just to rally people around. It's energy conservation and energy compounding, right? It's taking all the things that creative people love to do, because a lot of our marketing is driven by, again, our unfair advantage in that our designers are designing things for designers. So they're quite expansive in their set of ideas and things that they can throw out into the world, and many of those things end up taking much more energy than we expected. So finding a way to trim down the list of things we do to things that can, right, and are architected to have 5-way wins. Things that are good for our brand, things that are good for sales, things that are good for growth, the top of the line, things that are good for partnerships, and things that are good for our team. I know that sounds very fluffy, right? But it is like kind of an architectural rigor to hey, don't just make a UI kit. Make a UI kit with Airbnb, with a partner, which will be good for our brand, and then pre-release it to sales so they can send it out 2 weeks early to people that are in funnel, and maybe use it to attract new people. And I guess the team will enjoy that too. That's probably a bad one. You get the idea, right? But
Ec2
trying to do
framework.
less one-off, when you end up doing a lot of these fun creative activities, you end up kind of just diffusing your energy, finding a way to architect, and I wish I did this much earlier, fewer, more intelligently architected instruments, right, that had a greater return on energy.
Right. So what I've heard Phil say is, build more products that can amplify the impact of those existing relationships. I've heard you talk about creating these kernels that explode kind of through your different channels.
Right.
What about you, Gail?
It's just one funnel. There may be different paths through by different channels, but it's a single funnel. And as you grow and functions grow and they get to be more experts in their individual functions, there is a tendency for sales and marketing to pull apart,
Right.
and sales and customer care and that experience to get disintegrated. So just to my 10-year-old person, because we were really good at it being one funnel and one experience early, just never let go of that.
And so align the organization around one shared focus, which is that funnel.
Sure.
10-year-old self. Got it. Excellent. Well, thank you guys for being such great participants. I think we're opening it up now for Q&A. Will there be
Was that too good?
microphones?
No questions?
No.
Over here, Amish with FirstMark. So I'd be curious, what's the most surprising, interesting, like single tactical marketing thing that you did that was, I don't know, unique, creative, had a lot of impact, just something singular and special?
So we made a movie. We made a feature-length documentary called Design Disruptors. You can see it at designdisruptors.com. So I remember I sat down, kind of wanted to preview with a reporter at a major outlet. I'm like, hey, I just want to make a movie about the space, design, digital product design, like how it's changing the world, how every category in the world is being redesigned through the customer, experience revolution. And I remember she looked at me and she said, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And I said, I've got a winner. So I went and just interviewed. So we did it kind of like in parallel with this idea of energy conservation, right, and compounding. We went out and interviewed the design leader inside of like every company you've ever cared about, Airbnb and Netflix and Uber and Twitter and Google and Facebook, right? And we turned those interviews into testimonials about our product and into literally a feature-length film. And then we didn't release the film. We actually only did like private screenings of the film, like ourselves. We did like 5 red carpet things. We had like, I don't know, 500, 1,000 people show up to these things,
Wow.
all over the world. And then we turned it over to the community and let design organizations and like special interest groups pay $500. We gave that $500 to charity, right? And they could show the film themselves. And so far we have had something crazy, something like 1,500 individual screenings of this film, like around the world, in like every General Assembly location and the Uber office and the Dropbox office. So that was definitely, I thought it was going to be cool, and I thought it was going to be a big brand bang. I didn't think we raised like a sick amount of money for charity, which was great.
Nice.
And it just positioned us, again, adjacent to our best customers, which I think if I were to say there's anything that underlies the spiritual energy of the Invision brand, is just being really super close to those customers. And the way we did that was kind of by creating a platform and elevating those individuals and giving them kind of like, and that's maybe something you can do much easier when you have a market that's new and evolving, and there isn't celebrity you can make, kind of making the band for designers.
Nice. Gail, do you want to react to that as well?
No, we can get another question from the audience.
I think I can talk loud enough. I just want to hear, I know we're talking about acquisition, but as someone who's more in the low value, high volume, we have about 25,000 customers. I wanted to turn it and talk a little bit just like single most valuable thing you did in terms of actually managing and hopefully reducing churn. So 25,000 customers, even if you're only churning 1% a month
Yep.
or 1/4% a month, it's huge.
I
The
know.
bigger you get, the more success you have, the
Yeah,
worse it gets. I'd
so
love to
yeah,
hear-
Constant Contact's peak, we were 650,000 customers, and we'd gotten down to 1.8% monthly churn, but that was like a freaking big number. Churn. So the number, very counterintuitive. As we got smarter and did more data science, our number one determinant of churn was how successfully onboarded the customer got.
Right.
So churn is all connected to early experience. And so we got really smart about knowing when somebody was on the happy path and having a score for them and figuring out if they called into customer support, flashing in Salesforce something that told the rep that that person wasn't well onboarded and gave that customer care rep freedom and it actually had different categories of how they were, like where their onboarding problem was. So they didn't have to go into the account and diagnose it themselves. It was like a red, green, yellow light chart. And they'd pick the kind of place where they were worst or the place where we had the top priority. So for us, for example, if their list wasn't growing, it was a very bad sign. It meant they weren't using our list growth tools. So that was the number one. If that was red, you go there. And so that we called it the newbie program, and people spent extra time getting that person on board, and that would be a huge swing in retention.
Gail, you used your, sorry, just ask a question. You used your customer support team as a customer success team, like on the
Absolutely.
fly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
And just to ping off of that, exactly that, and then we got really involved in instrumenting the product and really understanding the product and building analytics around what was being used, how much was being used. In Marketo, we were actually the first customer and co-development partner of the company became Gainsight today to really understand what was being used and how to model. And it really got to be that we could predict churn risk very high by being able to understand what people were using in the product, how much time people were spending in features, whether they were in or out or bouncing off of that. And so these new generation of tools like Pendo that Neeraj is in, et cetera, give the ability to have that not be a science project, but everybody should be instrumenting their products. In those
Yeah,
kinds of
I
ways.
can speak to that as well. In a past life, we had a high volume business similar to yours. It was an ATS tool, and we tuned to Tango, Pendo, and Marketo to actually, if we could tell if they came through this channel, did these actions convert on this day, they're probably going to be a customer that churned.
Yep.
And so Marketo was a foundation of doing that. Any other questions?
Hey, question for Phil. I know the marketing automation space got like super competitive, and there was a lot of bake-offs and a lot of head-to-head. How did you guys talk about competition internally, and how you wanted to position and how nicely you want to play, and when you didn't want to play nicely, and kind of how to keep the sales reps in check and everything having to do with that?
I spent a lot of time on that. Bill Bench, who's my longtime head of sales for $0 to $200 million or something like that. Had sort of a little bit of a code. Marketo was a company that really tried to take the high road, really tried not to get as mixed up in some of the competitive games as we had. But we had a phrase, bloody knuckles, that Bill and I had. And we'd talk, and it actually kind of got used as like, when was it time to do bloody knuckles and when was it not time to do bloody knuckles? And so we would actually kind of get together and powwow on it from time to time. And it got, in sales management then, this idea of you have to take the high road, but you can't be a sap and you can't be a pushover and you can't do anything else. And so it was almost a switch where it became part of the sales culture to take that high road, but to know when you had to go, always be on the right side of ethics, always be on the right side of a bunch of stuff, but be willing to mix it up. And that ability to sort of have a code phrase that was the time to like just pull out the stops was a way to modulate and to understand how to be highly competitive, but to have a culture that also was much more nurturing than that. So I think that sort of sense of have a culture, but know when it's time to really get down and dirty.
Bloody knuckles. Nice. You there?
Yeah.
Question for, I guess, Phil and Gail. It's a big decision to ultimately wind up, and both your public companies, it's a big decision to ultimately sell your company. How do you go about making the decision to sell as opposed to maybe another 5 or 10 year slog and going for the $10 billion company and instead of spinning out Gainsight, acquiring that and just becoming the $10 billion thing?
Well, my biggest mentor, and who was my lead independent director, Roger Saboni, sort of had a phrase that he said, think about 2 years of perfect execution and try to model if you have 2 years ahead of you and you execute everything perfectly. You can hire the workforce you need, you build the products you need, nothing bad happens. What do you think the market's going to value you at? And the basic rule of thumb we used is, we don't know the answer to that, but we could compute it. And we said there was an offer on the table that was better than what we thought we could do with 2 years of perfect execution. And that was the decision point. If we had come up with a different calculation that said 2 years of perfect execution could have the stock price at 45 or the market cap at 2.8 billion and we're being offered only 2 billion, then let's not do it. And to me, that sort of made a lot of sense because it was how do you think about kind of the risk of the money on the table versus the risk of leaving it ride. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb.
Wow.
Yeah, the process wasn't all that dissimilar. You know, we had multiple opportunities along our growth trajectory before we filed to go public, during the IPO dual path process. We had 2 other approaches post-public before the one we ultimately took. And it really became about, and one was even a bottom fisher in a stock market, you know, trough who tried to, you know, and we basically, the board said we work for the long-term shareholders. We work for the shareholders, but long-term, and if we think in, 12 to 24 months, we're well past that number, we shouldn't take it. Combined with the fact that the team just wasn't done, right? We had incredible passion for the small business market. Everybody was at the table. Everybody was ready to fight. And so I think it was a combination of perfect execution, hadn't convinced us that in 2 years our stock price would be higher than the stock price we had at the table. And I think we just saw changing market conditions that we weren't positive we had an answer for. So risk and uncertainty had gotten higher. But it was a very, very difficult decision.
I think you were waiting to answer.
Yeah, question for Gail and actually everyone else. When you get into thousands of active accounts and multiple channels that bring those accounts, especially when you have to educate them, you got to deal with a lot of data and multiple attribution and so on
First
and
touch,
so forth.
last touch, multi-touch. Yep.
Multi-touch, exactly. So how did you organize
Analytics.
analytics
Yeah,
as well
and
as
data science.
how did you
Yep.
make sure that this data is clean? Was that internal, like within each department, or there was an internal team?
So it clearly evolved over time, and it shifted in ownership over time, and it was never perfect. So this is really hard to do. In the end, the best model we had was a team under our CFO that had the data science and analytics, and a team under the tech side that had the tech stack for analytics. We had a ridiculously kind of big set of data and analytics. And then under our CFO, there was a business partner for each key function. So there was a head of analytics for the funnel, for sales and marketing, and a head of analytics for the product, and a head, you know, so they had dedicated resources, because earlier it was sort of like whoever yelled the loudest got the next project, and there was always a backlog of projects. And so that's how we did it. You know, we started the first touch, last touch attribution thing, and I just had no time for that bullshit, right? So we had a big difference between kind of the internal CAC metrics we used and the external ones we used, because internally, you know, if you touch the customer, we gave you credit for it, but externally it needed to be a little bit purer. And we just sort of separated them, because I didn't want to fight about who got credit for stuff. That's just not a great use of time. And so we basically said everybody got credit, but then we added up everybody's, like, we need this much from this channel, this much from this channel, and we kind of added overhead of 20 or 25%, so that we were kind of over allocating what we needed to get to make the quarter, and everybody had an accountable number that we could live with internally. So we just, the touch thing was just.
I'm going to pivot that actually to Phil. Phil, I mean,
Yep.
did your VP of sales carry renewal rates as part of his metrics? Did your head of marketing have an expansion number? So how did you align the MBOs and KPIs of the different heads in this process?
Well, we were very much an all-in-one, and all for one and one for all culture. So we all shared all the same metrics, and nobody had any. I mean, never at Marketo really did any of the different departments have any metrics anybody was compensated on, or that we looked at that everybody didn't really share in. And so we really tried to keep. I think back to Gail's point of one funnel was, you know, basically captured exactly that whole idea for how we focused on things. So yeah.
Okay, last question. One last.
Question for you, Gail. And if I had to step out, so if you answered it, I apologize. You made a comment 20 minutes ago about the fact that on your peak you spent $1.5 million a month on
Just
on-
AdWords.
on AdWords. What does that represent in terms of your sort of percentage of sales, if you don't mind?
Oh, God, I have to go back and remember metrics. So I think kind of at its peak, AdWords was like, so its peak wasn't the same as peak spend because efficacy does go down
Sure.
over time. But I think AdWords was maybe 30% of our total acquisition funnel at one point.
Is that normal? I mean, that seems high, but that's, yeah,
That's true of Marketo. It was
Yeah.
exactly the same.
it was
about
30%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Appreciate
Yep.
that.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for great questions, and thank you Phil, Clark, and Gail for your time. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Round of applause.
Thank you.